I'm sorry, Mom. Ireland is cancelled. My daughter-in-law Rachel sighed over the phone. Her voice carried that practiced heavy tone people use when they want you to know they are suffering more than you are. David's hours at the firm got scaled back. Finances are just too tight right now. We can't swing the flights or the hotels. I sat at my kitchen table looking at the brand new hiking boots I had placed near the back door to break in. I am Andrea Hayes. I'm 68 years old and I have been a widow for 9 years. I spent 35 of those years managing the schedule for a busy dental practice. I am not a woman who falls apart when plans change. That's quite all right, Rachel, I replied smoothly. You and David need to focus on your household. Don't worry about me. You're so understanding, Mom. We're just going to do a staycation. Try to save some money, she added, hanging up shortly after. I didn't cry. I didn't call my son to guilt trip him. I simply walked into my bedroom, took my suitcase off the bed, and quietly unpacked the thick wool sweaters I had bought for the damp Irish weather. I drove to the sporting goods store, returned the hiking boots, and put the money back into my checking account. I canceled my portion of the bed and breakfast reservations, eating the small deposit loss without a word of complaint. For 3 weeks, I went about my normal life. I tended to my garden. I volunteered at the local library. I gave my son and his wife their space, assuming they were stressed about money. I even considered making a double batch of lasagna to drop off, figuring they might appreciate a free meal if groceries were becoming a concern. Then, on a quiet Tuesday evening, I sat down with my tablet and a cup of tea. I opened social media, a habit I indulged in maybe twice a month. And there at the top of my feed was a gallery of 25 photos. The first photograph hit me like a splash of ice water, but my hand holding the teacup remained perfectly steady. There was my son, David, standing on the edge of the cliffs of Moher, a breathtaking expanse of green and gray behind him. Next to him stood Rachel, wrapped in a heavy tartan scarf, a wide, genuine smile across her face. And flanking them on either side were Rachel's parents, Susan and Greg. The caption underneath read, 12 amazing days wandering the Emerald Isle with my favorite people. Family trip. Blessed into Ireland 2026. I didn't gasp. I didn't throw my tablet. I just stared at the screen, my eyes tracing the date stamps. They had left on the exact day our original flight was booked. They had stayed through the exact window we had planned. I swiped to the next photo. It was the 4 of them raising pints of Guinness in a dark wood pub in Galway. The next was Rachel's mother standing in front of a castle, linking arms with my son. My heart didn't break. It just went very cold and very clear. I had not been left behind because of budget cuts. I had been uninvited. I had been replaced by Susan and Greg. Rachel hadn't wanted to manage her mother-in-law on a 2-week vacation, and my son, who had always avoided conflict like the plague, simply let her cancel me. They had looked me in the eye, fed me a story about financial ruin, and then boarded a transatlantic flight. I placed the tablet face down on the table. I walked into the kitchen and poured the rest of my tea down the sink. I did not feel the urge to call them and scream. I did not feel the need to beg for an explanation. The explanation was right there in high definition. Instead, I walked over to my home office desk. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out my thick gray financial ledger and my latest bank statements. If finances were the lie they chose to tell, I was going to look very closely at the truth. I spent the next 2 hours doing what I do best, organizing data. When my husband passed away, he left me completely debt-free with a paid-off house and a very comfortable retirement cushion. Because of that, I had always tried to make life a little easier for David and Rachel. I wasn't rich, but I was secure, and I believed families should help each other. I ran my finger down the columns of my checking account, and the joint savings account I still shared with David from his college days, a safety net I had left open for their emergencies. I started writing numbers on a yellow legal pad. 4 months ago, $3,500 transferred to David for a sudden roofing issue at their house. 7 months ago, $2,000 for Rachel's car repairs. A year ago, $5,000 to help them with the down payment on their new SUV. I looked at the dates. The $3,500 for the roof was transferred exactly 2 weeks before Rachel booked the Ireland flights. The realization settled over me with a quiet, undeniable logic. I wasn't just the mother they didn't want to travel with. I was the financial float that made it possible for them to travel with her parents. The next morning, I drove straight to the bank. I sat across from a teller named Denise. "I need to close this joint savings account," I instructed, sliding my ID across the counter. "And I want the entire balance transferred into my primary checking account, which is solely in my name." "Of course, Mrs. Hayes," Denise smiled, typing away. "Would you like me to notify the secondary account holder?" "No, thank you," I replied pleasantly. "I'll handle the notifications myself." I watched the screen as $18,000 money I had kept parked there for them just in case moved firmly back into my absolute control. I signed the paperwork, took my new receipt, and walked out into the sunshine. Taking back my money was step 1. Step 2 required a bit more physical labor. For the past 4 years, David and Rachel had treated my house like a free climate-controlled storage facility. My basement was packed with their excess belongings, Rachel's massive collection of holiday decorations, their old patio furniture boxes of college textbooks and winter tires they didn't have room for in their garage. They also had a key to my front door, which they used freely to drop things off, do extra loads of laundry when their machine was busy, or raid my deep freezer. I drove home from the bank and immediately called a local moving company. I requested 2 strong men and a box truck for the following afternoon. Next, I drove to a self-storage facility a few miles down the highway. I rented a clean, secure 10x10 unit and paid for exactly 1 month in advance in cash. The next day, the movers cleared my basement. I supervised as every single box piece of furniture and set of tires belonging to my son and daughter-in-law was loaded into the truck and transported to the unit. I snapped a heavy brass padlock onto the rolling door and slipped the only key into my purse. My basement was suddenly vast, empty, and beautifully mine. That evening, a local locksmith arrived at my house. He replaced the deadbolts on both the front and back doors. "Someone lose a key, ma'am?" he asked casually as he drilled the new strike plate. "No," I answered, handing him my credit card. I just decided it was time to establish some boundaries. I spent the weekend thoroughly cleaning the house. I bought myself a beautiful new armchair for the living room and set it exactly where I wanted it. David and Rachel were due back from their staycation on Sunday afternoon. I knew their routine. They always stopped by my house after a road trip to pick up their mail, drop off dirty laundry, or complain about traffic. I made a fresh pot of coffee, sat in my new armchair, and waited. At 3:15 p.m. on Sunday, David's SUV pulled into my driveway. I watched through the sheer living room curtains as they climbed out. They both looked incredibly well-rested, sporting light sunburns and carrying 2 large canvas bags that I knew were full of dirty clothes. David walked up the front steps, chatting animatedly with Rachel, and slid his key into the deadbolt. He jiggled it. He frowned. He pulled the key out, looked at it, and tried again. Rachel sighed heavily, shifting her heavy laundry bag. "David, just push the door. It always sticks," she complained. "It's not turning, Rach," he muttered. I stood up, smoothed my sweater, and walked to the entryway. I opened the door. "Mom." David jumped slightly. "Hey, your lock is busted. My key won't turn." Rachel pushed past him, looking annoyed. "Hi, Mom. Our washing machine was making a weird noise before we left, so we brought our laundry over. I hope you don't mind." We are exhausted from the drive. I stood squarely in the doorway, not stepping aside to let them in. The lock isn't busted, David, I said evenly. It's new. They both stopped. Rachel lowered her laundry bag onto the porch, her brow furrowing. You changed the locks. Why we need to get in if there's an emergency. I realized I prefer knowing when I have guests. I replied, keeping my voice light but firm. I don't mind visitors, but I prefer a phone call first. David looked confused, scratching the back of his neck. Okay. Sure, Mom. Makes sense. Anyway, can we come in and start a load? We've been driving for hours and just want to get this done. I didn't move from the threshold. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a small white envelope. I held it out to my son. David took the envelope, turning it over in his hands. What's this? Open it, I suggested. He lifted the flap and pulled out a folded piece of paper and a heavy brass padlock key. He unfolded the paper, and Rachel leaned over his shoulder to read it. It was the rental agreement for the storage unit, clearly showing the address and the unit number. A storage unit? Rachel asked, her voice sharpening. Mom, what is this for? I decided to reclaim my basement this week, I explained calmly. I had movers transfer all of your boxes, furniture, and tires to this unit. The first month is completely paid for. After 30 days, you'll need to transfer the billing to your own credit card or move the items elsewhere. Rachel's mouth dropped open. A flush of angry red crept up her neck. You hired movers. You let strangers handle my holiday decorations. You couldn't even wait until we got back from our staycation to talk to us about this. I looked directly into her eyes, holding her gaze until she blinked. I figured you both would be far too exhausted to move boxes, I said softly, allowing a tiny knowing smile to touch my lips. Jet lag from Dublin can be absolutely brutal this time of year. The silence on the porch was absolute. The wind rustled the oak tree in the front yard. David went completely pale, his eyes darting from my face to the white envelope in his hands. Rachel's angry expression shattered, replaced instantly by wide-eyed panic. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Your laundry is your responsibility now, I said, stepping back and beginning to close the door. I suggest you take it to a laundromat if your machine is broken. Have a good evening. I closed the door until it clicked, turned the new deadbolt, and walked back to my coffee. 4 days passed without a single text or phone call. I imagined the frantic whispered arguments happening in their kitchen. I knew David. He was a coward when it came to confrontation. He would wait until the tension was unbearable before making a move. On Thursday afternoon, my phone finally rang. It was David. Mom, can I come over? He asked, his voice strained. Just me. You can come over at 4 o'clock, I answered, setting a firm time. He arrived promptly at 4, looking nervous. I let him in and led him to the kitchen table. I offered him water, but no coffee and no snacks. We sat across from each other. Mom, look, he started rubbing his hands together. About Ireland. I am so sorry. Susan and Greg bought the plane tickets as a surprise, and Rachel didn't want to turn them down. We couldn't afford a third ticket for you, and we didn't know how to tell you without hurting your feelings. It was a stupid mistake. I just watched him. The lie was so smooth, rehearsed perfectly to make them look like victims of a generous surprise. I see, I replied simply. David took a deep breath, clearly relieved that I wasn't screaming or crying. He took that as an opening. The thing is, Mom, even with them paying for flights, the trip was really expensive. The hotels, the rental car, the food. We had to put a lot of it on our credit card. He paused, looking down at his hands. We're really underwater this month. The interest rate is killing us. I was wondering if you could loan us $6,000 just until my bonus comes in at the end of the quarter. He actually came to ask me to pay for the trip he excluded me from. The sheer audacity of it didn't anger me. It simply confirmed everything I had already concluded. I didn't reach for my checkbook. I reached for the gray folder I had placed on the counter earlier. I slid the open folder across the table toward my son. Inside was a single, neatly typed spreadsheet. "What's this?" David asked, picking it up tentatively. "That is a list of every financial contribution I have made to your household over the last 48 months, I said. "The down payment, the car repairs, the emergency vet bills for your dog. The total is at the bottom." David's eyes scanned the page, landing on the bold number at the bottom, $42,500. He swallowed hard. "Mom, we appreciate everything you've done. You know that," he mumbled, trying to hand the paper back. I didn't take it. I tapped a specific line item from 3 weeks prior. "You see this $3,500 you told me you had an emergency roofing issue. But I happen to know that $3,500 perfectly covers 2 round-trip premium economy tickets to Dublin, plus a few nights in a nice hotel." David froze. The color drained from his face again. "You didn't lack the money to take me, David. You used my money to take your in-laws," I stated, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "You funded your lifestyle and your vacations with my retirement savings while looking me in the eye and telling me you were broke. Mom, Rachel's parents—" "I don't care about Rachel's parents," I interrupted calmly. "I care about the fact that you lied to my face, took my money, and then left me to unpack a suitcase alone. You used me as an ATM. And the worst part is, I let you. I made it easy for you to disrespect me because I always kept the vault open." I pulled the folder back and closed it. "I'm not angry, David. I am just finished." He stared at me, panic finally setting into his features. "Finished? What does that mean?" "It means the Bank of Mom is permanently closed," I said, folding my hands on the table. "I am not giving you $6,000. I am not giving you $6. The joint savings account we had, it's closed. The money is back in my name." David leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "Mom, you can't do that. We have automatic payments tied to that account. The car insurance pulls from there next week. Then I suggest you log into your portal tonight and update your billing information," I replied, without missing a beat. "You are 32 years old, David. You make a good salary. If you and Rachel choose to live beyond your means to impress her parents, that is your burden to carry, not mine. You're going to let us drown in debt over one trip," he pleaded, his voice rising, trying to shift the blame onto me. "You aren't drowning, David. You're just finally learning how to swim." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I love you. I will always be your mother. But I am no longer your safety net, and I am no longer your storage unit. Please see yourself out." He left, slamming the door slightly harder than necessary. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a long, aggressive text message from Rachel, accusing me of being vindictive, unsupportive, and trying to ruin their marriage over a simple misunderstanding. I didn't reply. I simply blocked her number. I didn't need to argue with a woman who had no power over me anymore. I walked through my quiet, clean house, admiring the empty spaces. The silence wasn't lonely. It was the most peaceful the house had felt in years. 6 months passed. The transition wasn't completely seamless, but I held my ground. Without my financial padding, David and Rachel had to face their own reality. I heard through a mutual family friend that they had to sell Rachel's expensive SUV to pay off their credit cards and downsize to a used sedan. They also had to empty out the storage unit and host a massive garage sale to afford the monthly fees. David comes over for coffee once every few weeks. Our conversations are polite, surface level, and completely devoid of financial requests. He knows the boundary is solid steel. Rachel refuses to come over, which suits me perfectly fine. My home is a sanctuary, not a battleground. It is a crisp Tuesday morning in September, and I am standing in my bedroom zipping up a brand new suitcase. Inside is a heavy, waterproof raincoat. I didn't rebook Ireland. That destination felt tainted, tied to a memory I didn't care to revisit. Instead, I booked a 14-day, fully guided premium train tour through the Scottish Highlands. I paid for it in full, using the exact funds I had reclaimed from the joint savings account. I pick up my passport and my boarding pass from the dresser. I don't have to wait for anyone. I don't have to check anyone else's schedule, and I certainly don't have to worry about someone calling to cancel on me because finances are tight. I lock my new deadbolt behind me, walk out to the waiting airport taxi, and smile. I spent years making myself available for people who only saw me as a convenience. It took a canceled trip and a photograph to teach me the truth. The only person whose permission I need to live my life is my own. And from now on, my itinerary is entirely mine.